CTV's W5. Here is Avery Haines.
Welcome back. Jon McMurray has a life that, on the surface, isn't much different from many Canadians. In fact, if you passed him on the street, there isn't anything about Jon that stands out. But looks are deceiving, because Jon is a medical anomaly. He walks through life with something so rare, so bizarre, it's hard to even comprehend. Jon McMurray looks like just an ordinary guy. Singing along to one of his favorite songs. But nothing about this scene or this man is ordinary.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ready or not?
And this is extraordinary as well.
Grounders.
Oh, I meant, shoot.
The beautiful wife.
10. Ready or not?
And 2 healthy children.
I got you.
It's a life no one expected for Jon. August 29th, 1995. Jon is stretched out asleep in the backseat of a car. He's on a road trip with friends, traveling from their hometown of Georgetown, Ontario, about an hour west of Toronto, to university in Nova Scotia.
We were in Rivière-du-Loup, Quebec, so by the New Brunswick border. It was pretty late, I think 11 something at night, and a tire popped, car flipped.
Jon is catapulted through the backseat window. He lands in a ditch, head first. After this near catastrophic accident, you end up in the hospital, 7 days in a coma. Your mom and your dad and your brothers race to Quebec to see you.
Yeah.
What did they see when they find you?
Sort of a vacant me, but with a blank tape. Same costume, same body, but just nothing inside.
When I got there and saw him, it was bleak.
To Chris McMurray, Jon's older brother, the future was far from certain.
I think he had just come out of the coma, and he was just a mess, man. Just a mess, like, you know, not communicating, obviously. Didn't know who any of us were. It was scary, you know? Just didn't know where it would go from there, if anywhere.
No one knew where it would go, because when Jon came out of that coma, his entire 22 years of life had been erased. Every single memory, everything he ever knew, gone. You see these people who have loved you for the last 22 years looking down at you, and you look up at them and think, I don't know who you are.
So parents, these are your parents. They could have said, these are balloons. It's like, okay, great. I have no idea what a parent is.
And you had no memory of them?
No.
Nothing?
No.
Not only had Jon lost his memories of people, but he didn't know how to talk or walk or know how to use even everyday objects.
I tried to shave with my toothbrush. So that didn't work out so well.
I mean, it's a terrifying, terrifying thing to wake up and have nothing be familiar and just blackness behind you for memory.
I've sort of felt like an alien because I wasn't from this place. Like because I didn't know anything and I couldn't recognize or understand the purpose of any object, I felt so out of place that I was essentially an alien.
What have the doctors told you about what happened to your memory?
So what they said was, it's like a library and all the books got knocked over. So they're still there. The books are still there. They're just on the ground and all scattered.
Surrounded by strangers in a world that didn't feel his own, this box represents Jon's attempts to relearn life, his own life, at a rehab center in Halifax, where he was transferred after his injuries were stabilized. That's your journal. So essentially in here, you're supposed to write down everything that you're supposed to do, the things that most of us would take for granted that we know you need to do in a day.
Brush your teeth.
You've kind of checked these off like they're prison on the prison wall.
It kind of felt like it. Reflecting on it and seeing how bare bones this information was and how much I needed help doing anything is a bit shocking now because I'm a pretty relatively functional person.
What's this?
Things. That's a micro cassette recorder. I have some tapes of conversations with people, specifically my parents, about the accident and what happened.
Now, I was already in a coma, but they kept me in a coma? No, let's say something's a brain injury. They put you in an induced coma. Oh, okay.
With Jon trying to cobble together the fragments of a life forgotten, his big brother Chris says the recovery was achingly slow. Until one day, a doctor suggested bringing music into Jon's life.
And it was unreal because he, hadn't been very communicative to any of us. But when these songs came on, he would lay there and he would start mouthing the words to it. And it was awesome because all of a sudden you had hope. That was like a lifeline, really, for us.
A lifeline, a sliver of hope that all was not lost. The man with no memories could remember the lyrics to songs he had loved before the accident. The radio comes on.
Yeah.
And something extraordinary happens.
We were driving to the valley and the song The Weight came on. And I started singing along in the back.
Take a load off Fanny. Take a load for free. Take a load off Fanny. And you put the load right on.
And my parents were just both looked back and couldn't believe it.
So while you forgot colors and shapes and your parents and your life, you remembered the lyrics to songs from your first life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's strange.
Music is almost like this anchor between these two lives.
Yeah, I love it. It's always been a pretty big part of my life.
Music is still his only anchor. The accident that stole Jon's memory was almost 2.5 decades ago. And while he's regained nothing else of his life before, Jon has built a new life. He calls it the sequel. And this woman, Allison, plays a starring role.
I think what originally attracted me to him was his sense. He's so funny and has a very witty sense of humor, and he's a lot of fun to be around. Very passionate about music, and I think very positive about life. So I think for me, I really gravitated to those things, and he's very kind.
Allison and Jon's love affair blossomed just a couple of years after the accident. They eventually married and had 2 children, now 11-year-old Jack and 8-year-old Quinn. Falling in love with someone who has no past must be a challenge in itself.
Yeah. I think, what was great in having his parents close was that we learned together so much about his past and his childhood. They would recount stories of when he was younger. For me, it was an opportunity to learn about him with him.
And since Jon doesn't remember even being a child, he has no point of reference for raising their 2 boys.
The one thing being a parent is, remembering what it feels like to be hugged and loved by your parents as a young child. Because I think, when you love your kids so much and you hug them when they're hurt, or, they really need you, or you're proud of them, I think he doesn't have that memory.
I have nothing to refer to or to know that this is how my parents did it.
Quinn.
They're still young, so I can fake my way through a lot of stuff, but it's difficult.
Jon has been told by doctors that he will never get his old memories back. And that brain injury did more than just erase Jon's past. He has been left with an extraordinary and rare neurological disorder that affects him in the most unusual of ways.
That's a good one. Quinn.
If he looked into the sea of faces of kids, he wouldn't recognize who his children were.
He can't recognize you, and he can't recognize the kids.
Yeah.
Like, that's just...
Mind-blowing. Yeah, it's really, you can't wrap your mind around it.
Jack. Nice.
Coming up, a life among strangers.
You didn't recognize your own wife. What was that moment like?
It's like hitting a wall.
When W5 continues.
Jon McMurray is a man without a past. Every single memory he ever had disappeared in a devastating car crash in 1995. And now, all these years later, the Georgetown, Ontario man is taking his 2 young sons to Halifax for a reunion
Oh my gosh.
with the medical team who helped build his new life.
Hey,
Hello.
it's only been 25 years. How are you doing?
I got a very poor memory. It's a long story, but
So do I. I totally recognize you.
Megan Connors was Jon's occupational therapist. Brenda Joyce was his doctor at the Nova Scotia Rehabilitation Centre, where Jon was transferred after the car crash in Quebec.
We're gonna go in 716, which is right here. I remember in your room you had your posters up and you used to play your music with your headphones on.
yeah. And then my ghetto blaster.
Your ghetto blaster.
With my earphones. Yeah. I brought this
Oh my
with
gosh,
me.
I recognize my writing.
Yeah.
Jon has brought with him a now tattered folder. His memory book filled with details of his early days of rehab.
You're gonna recognize some people here. There's you, Dr. B. Joyce. There you are. My doctor, yeah. See? And there's you, Megan.
Oh my gosh.
OT,
So young.
occupational therapy.
You look so young.
First floor.
That was a few years ago.
Yeah.
Definitely a few years ago.
Well, 95, so.
We were babies.
We were
Is
just
that-
babies.
Yeah. I don't know that. Oh, speech and social work. The 6th floor. Slept my blank off. So, oh, because of this probably.
that was the
Neuropsych test from 9 till 12.
You would have been exhausted after that.
Back then, when Jon was just recovering, no one knew that his memories would never return. Nor did they know that he would be left with a permanent and very rare neurological disorder.
It's visual agnosia. I don't know if they call it face blindness, but it's just I don't recognize people.
Visual agnosia, facial blindness. Jon cannot recognize people by sight.
If I were to leave and come back in, would you remember what I look like?
I might not know until you spoke, because I used voices to ID people.
Hello. How are you? Good.
Working part-time at the local beer store,
All right, so that's 17 more.
Jon has to use his ears, not his eyes, to recognize people. And his visual agnosia runs much deeper than not being able to recognize his regular customers.
Have a good day.
One day, a beautiful woman walked in.
I saw her just standing over in the empties area.
This woman walks in and you think it's a customer.
Yeah. And then she spoke, and then it was pop the balloon, because it was my wife.
Jon's own wife of 17 years, the mother of their 2 children, was, until she spoke, a complete stranger.
And when you realized that you didn't recognize your own wife, what was that moment like?
It's like hitting a wall. It's like driving into a wall at a really fast speed.
He was crying and saying, you know, I have to tell you something. And he was really upset and was choking back his words and said, I had no idea who you were, and I feel so guilty. Like, you're my wife, I should know you.
It's a bit of a sucker punch to realize that it's not over. This ride doesn't end. This is for life.
That never-ending ride of living with facial blindness extends to Jon and Allison's own children. When Jon does the daily pickup from the school bus stop, he relies on the mental notes he took about his kids before they left for school.
I make note, Quinn is wearing a green shirt, Jack is wearing a red shirt. Then I know that that's them because that's their shirt that they're wearing. But they'll just come to me.
You just wait for them to come to you.
I just stand at the exit. Dad! Okay. That's your voice?
Visual agnosia extends beyond human faces. Jon can see that duck near him, but he has no idea just what it is.
Part of that is the visual blindness, is the inability to differentiate between animals?
I never regained that knowledge of, like, this is what a horse looks like, this is what a cow looks like. It's context, you know? If I see someone walking something on a leash, it's probably a dog. But if someone wanted to trick me and had a pet raccoon, then I would probably just think that's a weird-looking dog.
Back at the Nova Scotia Rehab Centre in Halifax.
So, Jon, what we have is some of the x-rays from your initial injury.
Dr. Brenda Joyce shows Jon, for the very first time, the x-rays of his brain, taken immediately after the accident.
You had, obviously, a severe injury. And at the time of these x-rays, your brain was swelling, and that's the majority of what you see.
Is that what the white?
That's your skull.
Oh, that's my skull.
That's your skull, yeah, yeah. What happens in these injuries is you're ejected from a vehicle. You hit, but your brain keeps going. Okay. It causes more of a global picture of deficits, and that's what you had.
Okay.
As Jon studies his injured brain, Dr. Joyce explains that his visual agnosia is rare and complex. It's often caused by damage to the parts of the brain that integrate visual information.
Agnosias are basically the inability to understand what you're sensing. It's not because you don't know what they are. You can't associate that object that you're seeing with the memory of what it is.
It wasn't just Jon who spent months here recovering. His older brother Chris says their parents, the only two people with the keys to his past, were at Jon's side every day.
They dropped everything, went to Quebec, lived there in a hotel. Then when he got shipped to Halifax, moved there, lived in a hotel. They doubled down and were just really there for him. So their role was huge for sure.
Which makes this even more painful. The father Jon had to learn to re-love passed away 5 years ago.
It's heartbreaking to see, the close connection that he developed with his parents, who were really the passport to his past. But when his dad passed away, I remember thinking this is a huge part of Jon's life, that not only have we lost his dad, but we've lost his perspective on Jon's life pre-accident.
And now a double tragedy.
Big one? Yep, you got it.
Jon's mother has Alzheimer's. In a cruel reversal, the sole surviving keeper of Jon's childhood memories
Is Chris your son?
No, Chris is my brother.
Your brother?
Yeah, Chris is the guy
now
who's-
losing her own past.
There was a time where you didn't remember your mother. And now there are times where she doesn't remember you.
Yeah. Even if she doesn't recognize me, she likes my company, and even if I'm a random guy, I'm still gonna be the nice guy who comes and brings her a drink and sits and chats with her because it's my mom. It's really sad, and it's really hard to deal with sometimes, but what do you do? There's nothing you can do. Let's see, we'll flip through here and find some good pictures.
As I see his mom decline further, I think that's just so heartbreaking for him. And I don't know if he necessarily sees that view yet because he's in the pain of actively losing her.
Really, his childhood ends with
them
leaving.
Jon doesn't dwell on what he's lost, focusing instead on filling this new life with new memories.
I remember that Curry's girlfriend from high school, whose name was Cookie. No?
As friends and family gather for a late summer barbecue, Jon reflects on being an extraordinary man, living an ordinary life.
Choose your own adventure. Cheeseburger, 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 cheeseburger. It gives me perspective, and it makes me understand that I don't remember anything, and that has a pretty bad effect on my everyday life, but it's all relative because I have both my legs, I have both my arms. I lost some things, but it can always be worse.
Life is pretty good for you, despite the challenges.
Yeah, I think. I enjoy my life. I think it's pretty good.
Visual agnosia is so rare that it only is ever seen in less than 1% of patients who've suffered a brain injury.